So you've got a knee injury. Now, we've all had them. I had both my knees operated on in my early 20s, and I have to say, it was for me a reasonable outcome. Now, I can't say that for everyone, and it's a question I'm asked a lot about meniscus surgeries, and there's never a right or wrong answer. For some people it works, for some people it doesn't. I would say now in my 40s I would resist surgery as much as I can, whereas in my 20s there was more, there's more elastin, there's more collagen, there's less degeneration of the knee joint, and you've got more chance at recovery. So it's not an easy decision whether to go under the knife or not, but I would say that give it time, see if you can heal your knees on your own, and resist surgery as much as possible, obviously. Now, what are you doing still that you might do differently in your primary series to avoid, or at least not to make your knee injury worse? Now, first of all, don't forget, you can modify any posture. You don't have to sit there with the knee like this. In fact, if you're sitting there with the knee like this and pushing down, this is a very bad idea. Just simply cross the legs, continue. Cross the leg, continue. You can modify any lotus posture simply by using the cross legs. Now, secondly, as I said, if you're sitting there with the leg up there, that's no good. You really need to have the knee on the floor for it to be safe. Or you put a block or something underneath the hip so it holds the knee. If the knee is up here, it's in jeopardy, right? And the hip is only getting tighter to protect the knee. So really use a block, or you need the knee on the floor. Now, how do you get the knee on the floor? Well, first of all, you might want to do a few hip opening positions outside practice. These can be very, very beneficial, and perhaps I'll do another video on those basic hip openers soon. And it's not enough just to sit in Baddha Konasana, although that does help. Sitting in Baddha Konasana, morning and night, when you're watching a film or reading a book or whatever you're doing, it's not a bad idea. It helps with your adductors. It helps release your adductors, but that's not the only hip opening you need for your lotus posture. So a little bit of hip opening doesn't hurt. In fact, it can be very helpful because the postures themselves require open hips. They do increased hip opening a little bit, but they also require or pre-require fairly open hips to do. Now, what else can we do? Well, really it's a question of how you get into the lotus, and I'll show you and break down the 4 stages of your lotus here. Cradle the foot. First of all, you've got the cradling of the foot like a baby. Circle the leg. So you're getting the hip action. Remember, the hip is a ball and socket joint. So you're allowing the hip rotation to move as a ball and socket joint. Lift the foot up. So you've got upwards, you've got circling. And then you've got up, in, means the heel is on the navel. And then when the heel is on the navel, the joint of the knee is sealed, and you can start to roll the leg around. You can start to roll the leg around from the back of the hip, whereas when you've got the leg out like this and you're yanking it up, the joint of the knee is not sealed, and you're moving the knee, torquing the knee in a kind of, using the knee as a ball and socket joint, whereas actually the hip that you're doing the rotation from, ideally, right? So the knee essentially is a hinge joint, and so it needs to be mobilized as a hinge joint. So it needs to be sealed, and the hip has to drop enough so the knee is still used as a hinge joint, but the hip is low and the knee joint is sealed, right? So that's why I say circle it, so you get the idea that you're doing the movement from the hip, lift it, draw it inwards, and then you're coming round from the back of the hip, and the knee is a hinge joint. That's what I said. You need a fairly open hip so the knee can operate just like a hinge, whereas if the hip isn't open enough, you're taking too much of this movement to try and get it in because the hip won't open. And so when the hip won't open, the knee is a smaller and weaker joint, and it can be more easily forced than the hip. As I said, until this happens, until the hips are more open, simply modify the postures. There's no shame in sitting and waiting in things like Marichasana B, Marichasana D, Ardha Baddha Padma, things like this, and use your blocks and props. The first and quickest way to get rid of the blocks and props is to use them. Yeah? And when the knee is rested on a block, the hip can relax anyway and come down further. And don't forget to stay in those postures that you feel like you're getting some work in longer than 5 breaths. It really can make a huge difference to use those postures in a little bit longer time span and allow the body to unpeel and release itself a little bit. Right? I hope those little knee pointers helped, and yes, I would, as I said, I'm skeptical about the surgery, although it did work out for me. It's generally definitely not a general recommendation, but in the last case scenario, it can still be effective. If you have any questions or comments on this, I'm more than happy to talk to you further about the knee injuries, as I do have experience myself of knee injuries and of having had those surgeries, whereas more recently, as I said, I did have a knee injury and I resisted, and it has healed now through simply using the instructions that I've given you today and time and patience. Knees take time, so time is your friend here. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, like, hit the bell, and I'll see you again soon.